The sky remembers. The stone does not forget. A great fire fell, and the sun slept for 1,000 winters. We, the broken children, carved this warning so you would know. We were not the first. You stand on a lonely hilltop in southeastern Turkey as the stars begin to fade. The air is cool, carrying the scent of dry earth and wild thyme. Before you, rising like ancient bones from the soil, are the great T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe. They are enormous, 5 meters tall, weighing 20 tons each, arranged in perfect circles. The first rays of dawn catch the carvings etched into their limestone flanks. Foxes, serpents, scorpions, and long-legged birds. This is the world's first temple, built 12,000 years ago, 6 millennia before Stonehenge. But it was not built to celebrate a beginning. It was built to mourn an end. The question echoes in the silent air. What kind of people build a cathedral to remember a world they just lost? Hold that image in your mind. The sun rising over the world's first cathedral of stone. Before we uncover the secrets carved into these pillars, take a moment. Wherever you are, let the profound silence of this place find you. Wherever you're listening tonight, a quiet study in London, a late drive through the deserts of Los Angeles, a balcony in Lagos feeling the night air, welcome to Sapiens Untold. I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Find a comfortable position. Settle in. Dim the lights if you can. This is a space for quiet contemplation, away from the noise of the modern world. If the deep mysteries of our human story pull at you the way they pull at me, take a moment to like and subscribe. You're part of a global community gathered here, asking the questions that echo through time. Now, let us return to that windswept hill in Anatolia, where the sun is climbing higher. The stones have been waiting for 12,000 years to tell their story. It's time to listen. Your gaze settles on one pillar in particular, known to archaeologists as Pillar 43. The morning sun casts its carvings in sharp relief, and you run your hand over the cool, gritty limestone. It feels impossibly ancient. The central figure is a large vulture, its wing raised as if in a gesture of protection or power. Below it, a scorpion. Other birds and a headless human figure complete the tableau. Orthodox archaeology interprets this as a complex funerary scene, a sky burial perhaps. But another reading emerges when you stop looking at the ground and start looking at the stars. Researchers have proposed a chilling alternative. This pillar is not a hunting scene, but a celestial map. The animals are not animals, they are constellations. The scorpion is Scorpius. The birds represent Libra and Sagittarius. The vulture itself is a symbol for the constellation Sagittarius as it was seen by ancient cultures. The arrangement on the stone, they argue, precisely maps the sky as it appeared around 10950 BCE, or 12,900 years ago. It is a date etched in stone. A date that coincides, almost to the year, with the proposed cosmic impact that triggered the Younger Dryas and plunged the world back into an ice age. This is not a record of a hunt. It is a memorial to the day the sky fell. The headless man is not a single death. It is a symbol for the death of millions, the end of an age. And here is the most profound mystery of all. This pillar was erected around 9600 BCE, more than 1,000 years after the cataclysm it depicts. For 40 generations, survivors passed down the memory of the world's end with enough astronomical precision for their descendants to carve this permanent, unyielding warning. The question isn't just who these people were. It is what kind of world had they lost that they would spend centuries building a monument of this scale, just to make sure no one ever forgot. You're in a place where time is frozen solid, a laboratory kept at a constant minus 24 degrees Celsius. Your breath hangs in the air, a fleeting cloud in the sterile fluorescent light. The only sound is the low hum of industrial freezers. Before you, laid out on a chilled metal table, is a cylinder of ice, milky white and translucent. It is an ice core drilled from 3 kilometers deep within the Greenland ice sheet, a library of ancient atmospheres. Each layer is a year, a season, a single snowfall from the distant past, compressed into a band of ice. You can see them clearly, thousands of delicate lines like the rings of a tree, stretching back into a time before human history was ever written. A scientist in a thermal parka points to a section of the core. "Here," she says, her voice muffled. "This is the boundary." Using a laser spectrometer, they analyze the atmospheric dust trapped in the ice year by year. They are looking for volcanic ash, desert sand, the normal background noise of the planet. As the laser scans across the layers, the data line on a nearby monitor stays relatively flat. Then, suddenly, it jumps. A spike so sharp, so anomalous, it looks like an error, but it's not. It appears in a single distinct layer of ice dated precisely to 12,800 years ago. The spike is platinum, an element exceedingly rare in Earth's crust but abundant in the cosmic dust of comets and asteroids. This isn't just a trace amount, it's a massive concentration, a chemical fingerprint of an extraterrestrial event. When first discovered, it was a geological curiosity. Then the same platinum signature was found at the same depth in ice cores from Antarctica, and then in sediment layers from over 50 sites across North America, Europe and Asia, all dating to the exact same moment in time. This is not a local event. It's the forensic evidence of a global catastrophe, a thin layer of dust from a shattered comet that settled over the entire planet like a shroud. The story carved in stone at Göbekli Tepe now has a corroborating witness, one written in the ice itself. You are now thousands of miles away from the frozen stillness of Greenland, kneeling in the dry heat of an archaeological trench in North America. The sun is relentless. The air smells of dust and baked earth. Your fingers trace a distinct line in the wall of the dig site. A thin, dark band of sediment, no thicker than your thumb, stark against the lighter soil above and below. This is the black mat. Geologists find it everywhere, a geological scar stretching from California to the Atlantic coast. Below it, the earth is rich with the artifacts of the Clovis people and the bones of mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed cats. Above it, there is an eerie silence. The bones vanish. The artifacts become scarce. This dark line is more than just ancient soot. Under the lens of an electron microscope, it reveals a collection of microscopic horrors. You see nanodiamonds, not the kind found in jewellery, but tiny hexagonal crystals forged only in the kind of extreme heat and pressure associated with a cosmic impact. You see magnetic spherules, minuscule iron-rich droplets that condensed from rock vaporized in a multi-thousand-degree firestorm. You find melt glass, soil and sand flash-fused into glassy beads, and shocked quartz, its crystalline structure fractured by a pressure wave of unimaginable force. Some have argued these markers could be the result of continent-spanning wildfires, But to find this specific deadly cocktail of materials, all concentrated in a single continent-wide layer that syncs perfectly with the platinum spike in the ice cores, that points to a single, violent, extraterrestrial cause. The black mat is the ground-level evidence of the same event recorded in the polar ice. It's the blast layer, the tombstone of the Pleistocene, marking the precise moment when the great beasts of the Ice Age and the cultures that hunted them faced an enemy that fell from the sky. It is a lane drawn across time, separating the world that was from the long, cold winter that followed. You're in the hushed, climate-controlled archives of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. The air is still, heavy with the scent of old paper and leather. A curator wearing white gloves carefully unrolls a fragile piece of gazelle skin parchment across a velvet-covered table. This is the Piri Reis map drawn in 1513 by an admiral of the Ottoman fleet. It is a Portoland chart, a navigator's map showing the coasts of Europe, North Africa and Brazil with remarkable accuracy for its time. But it is the map's southern edge that draws your eye, where it depicts a landmass that shouldn't exist. It shows the coastline of Antarctica, not as we see it today, buried under kilometers of ice, but the actual subglacial coastline, the true shape of the continent's land. We didn't know this coastline existed until it was mapped with seismic echo-sounding equipment in 1958. Yet here it is, drawn with astonishing precision in the 16th century. Piri Reis himself wrote in the map's margins that he compiled it from much older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and others from even more ancient sources he couldn't identify. The implication is staggering. For someone to have mapped Antarctica's coast before it was covered in ice, they would have had to do so more than 12,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age, when the continent was at least partially ice-free. It suggests the existence of a global seafaring civilization with advanced cartographic knowledge, a civilization that explored the entire planet long before the Egyptians or the Sumerians. This isn't just a map, it's a legacy, a fragment of a lost library. It's a message from a drowned world, passed down through generations of navigators, a ghostly echo of a forgotten age of discovery. It asks a profound question. Who were the original cartographers of the world and what happened to them? The Piri Reis map is not alone. You examine another chart, this one by the French cartographer Orontius Phineus, drawn in 1531. It too shows Antarctica, but with even more astonishing detail. It depicts rivers flowing from interior highlands to the coast, riverbeds that we now know exist, perfectly preserved beneath 2 miles of ice. The mathematical projection it uses is so sophisticated it wasn't reinvented until the 20th century, a projection that requires an advanced understanding of spherical trigonometry. These maps present a profound contradiction. They were drawn in the 16th century, yet contain information that was impossible to obtain until the 20th. How do you map a continent buried under ice? You don't. You map it when it isn't buried under ice. This wasn't a world of primitive hunter-gatherers. It was a world of settled communities and sophisticated cultures. Imagine Doggerland, the now drowned heartland of Europe in the North Sea. Seismic surveys have revealed its lost landscape 50 meters beneath the waves. River valleys, lakes, hills, and the faint outlines of what appear to be large settlements. Fishing trawlers regularly pull up Mesolithic bone harpoons, worked flints, and even human skulls from this submerged world. This wasn't an empty tundra. It was a thriving civilization. Now imagine Sundaland, a vast tropical continent twice the size of India, connecting modern Indonesia, Malaysia and the Philippines. Genetic and linguistic evidence suggests this was a cradle of maritime culture, where boat building and navigation may have been perfected tens of thousands of years ago. It was a world teeming with life, a paradise of coastal plains and lush lowlands. Most of humanity lived on these now drowned continental shelves, in places that today lie under 100 meters of water. They were the ones who mapped the world. They were the ones who stood at the dawn of what should have been a golden age. And then their world ended. You are suspended in a world of deep, silent blue. 25 meters below the surface of the East China Sea, off the coast of Japan's southernmost island, Yonaguni. The only sounds are the slow, rhythmic hiss of your regulator and the distant clicks of dolphins. Sunlight filters down in shimmering curtains, illuminating a structure so vast it feels like a violation of nature. It rises from the seabed in a series of colossal tiered platforms, flat terraces, and enormous, right-angled stone blocks that look for all the world like a sunken pyramid. This is the Yonaguni Monument. It is 150 meters long and 40 meters wide, a monolithic giant sleeping in the deep. Your dive light sweeps across a massive vertical face, revealing marks that look uncannily like tool marks. You swim along a perfectly flat terrace that ends in a sheer 90-degree drop. You pass between two towering megaliths, the twin pillars, that seem to form a gateway. Mainstream geology insists this is all a natural formation, a trick of sandstone fracturing along its bedding planes. But as you drift over what appears to be a grand stone staircase, the geometric precision feels too deliberate, too intentional. Geologists who have studied the site date the rock itself to the last ice age. If this structure was carved by human hands, it had to have been done when it was above sea level. The last time this monolith saw the sun and sky was at least 10,000 years ago, before the glacial ice melted and the seas rose to drown it. This is the great challenge of underwater archaeology. The most compelling evidence for lost civilizations lies in the most inaccessible places on Earth. Sites like Yonaguni, or the submerged ruins of Dwarka off the coast of India, hint at a human story far grander and more ancient than the one we read in textbooks. A story whose greatest chapters may have been washed away by the rising tides at the end of the Ice Age. As you swim closer to the main terrace of the Yonaguni Monument, you run your gloved hand along one of the sharp, clean edges. The rock is coarse, encrusted with millennia of marine growth, but the underlying geometry is undeniable. You can feel it. The sheer verticality, the crisp 90-degree angles. Nature can create strange and wonderful shapes, but it rarely works with a straight edge and a T-square. The debate over Yonaguni hinges on this very question. Where does natural geology end and intentional human modification begin? There are features here that seem to defy natural explanation. You swim towards a formation known as the Turtle, a massive carved stone that, from the right angle, bears an uncanny resemblance to a giant sea turtle. Nearby is a feature called the Loop Road, a pathway that winds around the structure, and most compellingly, you find circular holes bored into the rock, arranged in patterns that suggest they once held wooden posts, perhaps for scaffolding or support structures. These details, small but significant, argue for a human hand. You pause, hovering in the silent water, and look up at the colossal structure disappearing into the murky blue above. The sheer scale is difficult to comprehend. Whether a natural wonder enhanced by human hands or a fully man-made temple, its existence in this place, at this depth, is a profound anomaly. It forces us to confront the reality that our knowledge of the ancient past is incomplete, that there are vast unexplored territories, not just on land, but beneath the waves. The ocean floor holds the secrets of these drowned worlds, and we have explored less than 5% of it. What other monuments, what other cities, what other memories of our forgotten ancestors lie waiting in the crushing darkness of the deep? You stand at the edge of a vast open pit mine in the Siberian permafrost. The scale is industrial, terrifying. Giant trucks haul away gravel and silt, but what they're truly mining is ivory. For centuries, this has been the source of the world's finest mammoth tusks, millions of them, perfectly preserved in the frozen earth. Your gaze falls on something the miners have just uncovered, something far more precious than ivory. It's the carcass of a woolly mammoth, almost completely intact after more than 12,000 years in its frozen tomb. Its reddish-brown fur is still matted to its skin. The flesh is so well preserved that its last meal remains, undigested, in its stomach. You can see the delicate petals of buttercups, the heads of daisies and strands of wild grasses. And here is the core of the mystery. These are not Arctic plants. This mammoth was grazing in a temperate meadow on a warm day when something catastrophic and instantaneous occurred. It wasn't a slow death in a tar pit or a fall into an icy crevasse. This was a flash freeze, a sudden violent plunge in temperature so extreme that the food in its mouth didn't have time to be swallowed, let alone digested. Across North America the story is the same, but written in bone instead of flesh. More than 35 entire genera of large mammals, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, vanished from the fossil record in a geological blink of an eye, right at the Younger Dryas boundary. These were hardy, adaptable animals that had survived dozens of previous glacial cycles over millions of years. But they did not survive this one. They weren't outcompeted. They didn't slowly starve. They died together suddenly in a continent-wide extinction event that looks less like evolution and more like a mass execution. The evidence in the ice, in the soil, and in the frozen flesh all points to a single terrible day. You are back in the archaeological trench, staring at the layers of time exposed in the earth. The black mat is the dramatic climax, but the story it tells begins just below it. Here, in the pre-cataclysm soil, lies the evidence of the Clovis people, long considered the first inhabitants of the Americas. Their signature artifacts are exquisitely crafted spear points, fluted and deadly, found alongside the skeletons of the mammoths they hunted. For decades, the Clovis first model was archaeological dogma. Humans arrived around 13,500 years ago, spread rapidly, and then vanished or transformed after the Younger Dryas. But that story is collapsing. You're at a dig site like Monteverde in Chile or the Gault site in Texas. Here, archaeologists have pushed deeper, excavating the soil beneath the Clovis layer. And what they are finding shatters the old timeline. Your trowel scrapes against something hard. Carefully, you brush away the dirt to reveal stone tools, hearths with ancient charcoal, and butchered animal bones that are undeniably human in origin. But these are not Clovis artifacts. They are different, older. The radiocarbon dating results come back, and they are unambiguous. 15,000 years old, 18,000. At some sites, upwards of 25,000 years. This isn't a minor revision of the timeline, it's a complete rewriting of the human story in the Americas. It means that for 10,000 years before the Younger Dryas impact, sophisticated cultures were thriving, adapting and building a world we know almost nothing about. They lived through the peak of the last ice age. They hunted the mega-fauna. They were the true first Americans. The Clovis people were not the beginning of the story. They may have been the inheritors, or even the survivors, of a much older, deeper legacy. A legacy that was almost completely erased by the cataclysm written into that thin black line of soot and diamonds, just a few centimeters above your head. You stand on the high, arid plain of the Bolivian Altiplano, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. The air is so thin it starves your lungs, and the skies are painful, impossible blue. Before you lie the ruins of Pumapunku, a site that defies logic. Massive blocks of granite and diorite, some weighing over 100 tons, are scattered across the landscape like a child's discarded toys. This was once a magnificent temple complex, but some cataclysmic event threw it down with unimaginable violence. Orthodox archaeology attributes Pumapunku to the Tiwanaku culture, around 500 AD. The problem with this date is the technology. You run your fingers along an H-block, a signature feature of the site. The stone is andesite, a volcanic rock nearly as hard as diamond. The surface is machine smooth, the angles perfectly square. You slide a credit card into one of the grooves. It fits so precisely there isn't a micrometer of space to spare. Intricate channels are cut into the blocks, some with perfectly drilled circular holes. How was this achieved with the supposed Bronze Age tools of the Tiwanaku? We would struggle to replicate this precision today with diamond-tipped power tools. The local Aymara legends say Pumapunku was not built by mortals at all. They say it was built in a single night by giants after a great flood swept the world. Geologists have found evidence of a massive flood that scoured this plateau thousands of years ago, tumbling these 100-ton blocks like pebbles in a stream. Pumapunku feels impossibly ancient, like the ruins of a civilization that possessed a forgotten science of stone. It's a place of profound contradictions, precise futuristic technology in a pre-industrial context. It feels like a memory from another age, the ghost of a technology that shouldn't exist, preserved in stone on the roof of the world. You kneel beside one of the shattered H-blocks at Pumapunku, your fingers tracing a groove so fine it feels like a crack in glass. The andesite stone registers an 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. Steel tools barely scratch it. Bronze tools would be useless, yet the cuts are here, impossibly fine and perfectly straight. Some researchers have proposed that the builders of Pumapunku possessed a lost technology, perhaps a way of softening the stone chemically, or sonic drills that could liquefy rock. There's no direct evidence for this, only the silent, confounding testimony of the stones themselves. The logistical challenges are just as baffling. The red sandstone quarry for the largest blocks is 10 kilometers away. The andesite was brought from a quarry 90 kilometers away, across the waters of Lake Titicaca and up a steep mountainside. How do you transport a 100-ton block, the weight of a Boeing 757, across a lake and up a mountain, at an altitude where oxygen is scarce and every movement is an effort? There are no trees on the Altiplano large enough for wooden rollers. There is no evidence of wheels, of roads, of ramps. What haunts you is not just the how, but the why. Why build this monument of impossible precision in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth? The answer might lie in what came before. If survivors of a global catastrophe, refugees from a drowned, technologically advanced civilization, needed to rebuild, they would seek out high-altitude refuges, safe from the turbulent rising seas. They would bring with them the memory of their lost science, fragments of their engineering knowledge. Perhaps Puma Punku, like Göbekli Tepe, is not the beginning of a new civilization, but the last echo of a forgotten one, a final, desperate attempt by the last masters of an ancient science to build something permanent, something that could survive the end of the world. You're flying in a small plane over eastern Washington state. Below you, the landscape is scarred. Great rolling hills of gravel and sand, some hundreds of feet high, stretch to the horizon. Deep canyons known as coulees are carved into the basalt bedrock as if by a giant chisel. For decades, geologists believed this bizarre terrain, the channeled scablands, was formed slowly, by gradual glacial action over millions of years. Then, in the 1920s, a geologist named J. Harlan Bretz proposed a radical catastrophic theory. This entire landscape was carved in a matter of days by a single, colossal flood. He was ridiculed for decades, but the evidence was undeniable. Giant ripple marks, identical to those in a stream bed but 100 times larger. Massive boulders, called glacial erratics, dropped hundreds of miles from their origin. This was the result of the sudden failure of an ice dam holding back glacial Lake Missoula, a prehistoric lake that contained more water than all the Great Lakes combined. A wall of water 2,000 feet high scoured the landscape with the force of 10,000 rivers. Now consider this. The impact of a comet over the North American ice sheet 12,800 years ago would not create one Lake Missoula, but hundreds. It would have unleashed continent-spanning megafloods, a torrent of meltwater, ice and debris that would have reshaped the face of the Earth in an instant. This event would not have been a slow rising tide. It would have been a churning, violent cataclysm, a world-destroying deluge. And it is this very event, this terrifying wall of water, that is remembered in over 500 indigenous cultures across the globe. From the Sumerian king, Ziusudra, to the Hebrew Noah, from the Hindu Matsya avatar to the flood myths of Native American tribes from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, the story is the same. These are not just myths. They are eyewitness accounts, cultural memories of a real global catastrophe preserved for 12,000 years. You are now in a genetics lab surrounded by the quiet hum of DNA sequencing machines. The story of human survival and catastrophe is not only written in stone and ice, but also in our own blood. You look at a chart displaying human mitochondrial DNA, passed down unchanged from mother to child through countless generations. What it shows is a story of near extinction. Around 15,000 to 10,000 years ago, our genetic diversity collapsed. This is what geneticists call a population bottleneck, a catastrophic event that reduced the entire human population to just a few small, isolated groups. The rich tapestry of human lineages that had developed over tens of thousands of years was suddenly frayed, reduced to a few precious threads. This genetic scar aligns perfectly with the Younger Dryas. It tells of a world where humanity was pushed to the brink. For 100 to 200 years, survivors huddled in refuge zones, the Fertile Crescent of the Near East, the Nile Valley, the highlands of Asia and the Americas, and the deep caves of Europe. They were not primitive savages starting from scratch. They were the keepers of a legacy, the inheritors of a world's worth of knowledge. Ancient texts from around the globe tell the same story. In Egypt they speak of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, a lineage of wise rulers who reigned before the first pharaohs, in a time before the land of Egypt existed as we know it. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian king lists describe the Apkallu, 7 sages who survived the Great Flood and brought the gifts of civilization, writing, law, agriculture, to the scattered remnants of humanity. Are these gods, or are they something far more profound? Are they the human faces of the survivors? Highly organized, technologically sophisticated people carrying the intellectual fire of their drowned civilization, tasked with the sacred duty of remembering what the rest of the world had been forced to forget. You're standing on the wind-blasted tundra of northern Siberia, a landscape of frozen earth and endless sky. This desolate plain was once the heart of a lost continent, a landmass called Beringia that connected Asia to North America. It wasn't a barren ice bridge, but a vast, rich grassland ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe. For tens of thousands of years, this was one of the most vibrant habitats on Earth, supporting immense herds of woolly mammoth, bison, horses, and the human hunters who depended on them. Today, Beringia lies submerged beneath the Bering Strait, but its memory is preserved in the permafrost. You walk beside a team of paleontologists as they use high-pressure hoses to melt away the frozen soil of a riverbank. Slowly, an entire world emerges from the ice, not just the bones of mammoths, but the fossilized remains of temperate forests, tree stumps still rooted in the ground with trunks over 2 feet in diameter, layers of volcanic ash that allow for precise dating, and woven between it all, the undeniable signs of a long-term human presence. Archaeologists have unearthed sophisticated tool industries, permanent settlements built with mammoth bones and driftwood, and elaborate burial sites. These were not scattered nomadic bands. These were established cultures, with complex social structures and deep ancestral roots in this land. They lived here for millennia, masters of the Mammoth Steppe. When the Younger Dryas ended and the ice sheets melted, the sea level rose, and this entire continent, this northern cradle of civilization, was slowly, inexorably drowned. The people who lived here were forced to flee, some east into the Americas, others west into Asia, carrying with them the stories of a great flood that had swallowed their homeland. Their world now lies in darkness, a lost continent waiting to be rediscovered. This story of Beringia's lost civilization isn't just told by mammoth bones and submerged landscapes, it's also written in the DNA of living people. In the same genetics lab you now examine a different kind of map, a map of human migration, drawn from the genetic markers of indigenous populations across Asia and the Americas. For years the model was simple, a single wave of migration across the land bridge. But deeper genetic sequencing has revealed a ghost. It shows that the ancestors of Native Americans separated from their Siberian relatives around 25,000 years ago, but didn't begin populating the Americas until 15,000 years ago. For 10,000 years, an entire branch of the human family tree existed somewhere in the north, genetically isolated. They were not in Siberia, and they were not yet in Alaska. Where were they? They were in Beringia. Geneticists call them the ancient Beringians, a lost population whose DNA survives today as a trace element in many Native American groups. They are a ghost tribe, a people without a country, whose homeland now lies 100 meters below the waves. Imagine the impossible choice they faced. For generations they had watched the sea slowly claim their lands. The choice was simple: move east or west, or drown. This wasn't a single heroic migration. It was a desperate, multi-generational refugee crisis. They carried with them not just their tools and their families, but a profound cultural memory of the world they had lost, a memory that would become the foundation for the flood myths and creation stories of their descendants. The drowning of Beringia wasn't the end of their story. It was a violent, tragic dispersal that would seed the cultures of 2 continents. You are walking in the long evening shadow of Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. This is the biblical landing place of Noah's Ark, the heartland of the flood narrative that echoes through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the story is far older than the Bible. It was first written down in Sumerian cuneiform, telling the story of the flood king Ziusudra. You look at a reproduction of a clay tablet, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which tells the same story. Utnapishtim, the survivor of the deluge, speaks of a great flood that destroyed the world, a cataclysm unleashed by angry gods that swept away all of humanity. For more than a century we have dismissed these stories as myth, as religious allegory. But what if they are memory? What if they are the fragmented, distorted, but fundamentally true accounts of a real historical event, passed down orally for thousands of years before finally being written down? Every detail of the Younger Dryas catastrophe is present in these ancient stories. The sky falling, an age of darkness, raging fires, and above all the flood. A world-drowning flood, survived by only a handful of people who carried the seeds of civilization into the New World. These accounts are not unique to the Near East. They are everywhere. The Australian Aboriginals, whose culture is the oldest on Earth, have oral traditions that speak of a time when their coastlines were different, before a great flood swallowed vast tracts of land. These are not allegories. They are precise geographic memories that have now been confirmed by modern geology. Indigenous cultures all across North and South America have nearly identical traditions. They aren't independent inventions. They are a global chorus, a collective human memory of the last time the world ended. The evidence suggests we should stop reading them as myths and start reading them as history. You are back at Göbekli Tepe, walking the perimeter of the excavated enclosures. What you see is only a fraction of what is here. You look at a tablet displaying a ground-penetrating radar survey of the surrounding hills. The screen glows with the faint geometric outlines of at least 16 more megalithic enclosures, still buried, still waiting. The full site is 50 times larger than what has been unearthed. For over 1,000 years, generation after generation of survivors returned here, building, carving, and remembering. And then, around 8,000 BCE, they did something inexplicable. They stopped. Not only did they stop, they deliberately and painstakingly buried the entire complex. Over several hundred years, they filled in the enclosures with millions of tons of earth, flint, and animal bone, burying their sacred cathedral under man-made hills. Why? Why would a culture spend 12 centuries building the world's most astonishing spiritual center, only to intentionally erase it from the landscape? This act of ritual burial is perhaps the site's most profound mystery. It was not destroyed or abandoned. It was entombed as if to protect it, to put it to sleep until a future age. Perhaps the survivors feared another cataclysm. Perhaps they understood that the knowledge they encoded in the stones, the astronomical data, the memory of the flood, was too dangerous for a world struggling to be reborn. The decision was made: bury it, hide it, let humanity forget, so that one day, when we were ready, we might find it again. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of preservation on an almost unimaginable timescale. It was the creation of a time capsule, a message in a bottle made of stone and earth, sent across 10,000 years of history, waiting for a generation with the tools and the courage to read it. You now stand before two seemingly unrelated images. On the left, a photograph of a carved stone pillar from Göbekli Tepe, depicting abstract symbols, a U shape, a crescent, a dot. On the right, a photograph of a gate from the temple complex at Tiwanaku, high in the Andes, thousands of miles and supposedly 10,000 years away from Turkey. Carved into the Andean stone are the exact same symbols in the exact same arrangement. This is not a coincidence. It is a signature. All across the world, from the megalithic temples of Malta to the pyramids of Egypt, from Easter Island to ancient Mexico, you find these recurring motifs, the same astronomical alignments, the same building techniques, the same strange stylized animal figures, and the same stories of a bearded civilizing hero who arrives by sea after a great flood. In Mesoamerica, he is Quetzalcoatl. In the Andes, Viracocha. In Egypt, Osiris. Always, he brings the knowledge of law, agriculture, mathematics, and astronomy. This is not evidence of separate, independent development. It is evidence of a global knowledge transfer. It suggests that the survivors of the Younger Dryas catastrophe, the 7 sages, did not remain in one place. They dispersed across the globe, a small dedicated brotherhood carrying the embers of a dying civilization. They sought out the scattered, traumatized bands of hunter-gatherer survivors and began the slow, arduous process of restarting the human project. They were not gods, but they must have seemed like it to those who had lost everything. They were the bearers of a sacred inheritance, planting the seeds of their lost knowledge in the fertile soil of a new world, hoping that something of their past might survive. This is why the great civilizations of our history, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, seem to appear so suddenly, so fully formed, with no developmental period. They were not born in a vacuum. They were heirs to a forgotten legacy. You are standing now in the main plaza of the Inca citadel of Ollantaytambo, high in the Peruvian Andes. Your gaze is drawn to a detail carved into the massive granite walls, a stylized 3-stepped cross. This is the Shakana, the Andean cross, a sacred symbol representing the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Now, mentally rotate the image of the H-block from Puma Punku. You see the same essential shape, a geometric key that unlocks a shared worldview. This symbolic language is not limited to stone. It is a living thread. The serpent and the vulture, or the condor in the Americas, are a constant presence in the art and mythology of both Göbekli Tepe and the ancient cultures of the Andes. In both traditions, the serpent represents the underworld, the earth, and esoteric knowledge. The great bird represents the heavens, the sun, and spiritual transcendence. The struggle and balance between these two forces is the central drama of their cosmology. How is it possible for the same complex symbolic language to appear in cultures separated by an ocean and 10,000 years of history? This is not cultural diffusion in the traditional sense. It's too specific, too deeply embedded. It feels like an inheritance. It's as if the survivors of the lost civilization didn't just carry practical skills like astronomy and agriculture. They carried a cohesive spiritual and philosophical system, a way of understanding the universe. This system became the blueprint for the great mythologies of the ancient world. The names changed, the details were adapted to local environments, but the core archetypes, the serpent and the bird, the flood and the saviour, the sacred mountain and the celestial alignments, remained the same. It is a single ancient song sung in 1,000 different languages. You're in the remote Egyptian desert, far from the tourist crowds of Giza. The sun beats down on a barren rocky landscape. Before you is Nabta Playa, a site that looks, at first, unimpressive, a circle of small weathered stones. But this humble circle, dated to 7000 BCE, predates the first Egyptian dynasty by 4,000 years. It is one of the world's oldest astronomical observatories. The stones align perfectly to the cardinal directions and mark the rising of specific stars, including Sirius and the belt of Orion. This wasn't built by simple cattle herders. This is the work of people with a sophisticated, multi-generational understanding of the sky. This advanced astronomical knowledge is a key signature of the lost civilization. Göbekli Tepe is a line to track the star Sirius. The Giza pyramids are famously aligned to Orion's belt. The temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia map the constellation Draco as it appeared in 10,500 BCE. Why this obsession with the stars? Perhaps because for a maritime civilization that navigated the globe, the stars were everything. They were clock, calendar, and map. But there's a deeper layer. Many of these ancient sites also seem to encode an understanding of a complex astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. This is the slow, 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis, which causes the constellations to gradually shift their position in the sky. To track precession requires continuous, meticulous observation over thousands of years. How did cultures that supposedly had no writing possess this knowledge? The only logical explanation is that they inherited it. They inherited it from a much older, more advanced parent culture that had the time and stability to observe the heavens for millennia. The astronomy encoded in these stone monuments is perhaps the clearest fingerprint of the lost civilization, a science of the stars that survived the drowning of the world. You are standing before the great Sphinx at Giza as the sun rises, painting the limestone in hues of gold and rose. It gazes east, a silent sentinel that has watched more sunrises than any other monument on Earth. Orthodox Egyptology dates the Sphinx to the pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. But you run your hand along the base of the enclosure wall, and the stone tells a different story. The limestone is deeply eroded, not by wind and sand, but by water. You see deep, vertical fissures running down the stone, the unmistakable signature of centuries of heavy rainfall. The Giza Plateau is a desert now. It has been for more than 5,000 years. The last time this region experienced the kind of torrential, prolonged rain needed to create this erosion was during a period known as the African Humid Period, which ended around 7000 BCE. Geologists who have studied these patterns are adamant. The weathering on the Sphinx is thousands of years older than the pyramids it guards. It speaks of a time when the Sahara was a green savanna, dotted with lakes and rivers. This single, profound geological fact opens up a chasm in our understanding of history. If the Sphinx is that old, then who built it? It would mean a great civilization existed on the banks of the Nile thousands of years before the pharaohs. A civilization with the skill and resources to carve this colossal monument from the living bedrock. This aligns perfectly with the ancient Egyptians' own records. Texts like the inventory stela found at Giza speak of the Sphinx as a monument of immemorial age, a sacred relic that was already ancient when the pyramids were being built. It suggests that dynastic Egypt was not a beginning, but a rebirth, a direct inheritance from a much older, lost golden age. You're on a reed boat, drifting on the impossibly blue waters of Lake Titicaca. The sun is intense, the air sharp and clean. This lake, the highest navigable body of water in the world, is the sacred heart of Andean civilization. It was here, the legends say, that the creator god Viracocha appeared after the great flood to begin the world anew. He arrived with a group of companions, the Shining Ones, who travelled the land, teaching the survivors the arts of civilization before vanishing into the Pacific Ocean. Your boat glides towards the island of the sun, a rocky outcrop that was the most sacred shrine of the Inca Empire. But the Inca were latecomers here. Beneath the Inca ruins, archaeologists have found the remains of a much older temple built by the Tiwanaku culture, and beneath that, more ruins, impossibly older. In 2000, a scientific expedition using sonar mapping discovered a vast submerged temple complex on the lake bed, covering an area of nearly 7,000 square meters. They found terraces for farming, a long road, and a massive ceremonial wall, all now 30 meters below the surface. The local Aymara and Quechua people were not surprised. Their oral traditions have always spoken of a great city at the bottom of the lake, the city where Viracocha began his work. These are not just legends, they are folk memories of a different world, a time before a cataclysmic flood raised the lake's level and drowned the original sacred center. The survivors were forced to higher ground, establishing new cities like Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, carrying the memory of their drowned world with them. The knowledge keepers of Lake Titicaca preserved this memory for millennia, a quiet, constant reminder that what we see on the surface of history is only a fraction of the story. You're in a darkened library, pages of ancient folklore spread before you. The air smells of dust and time. Here is a story from the Ojibwe people of North America. It tells of the star with the long tail, which came down from the sky and burned the world with its fire. Here is another from the Pima people of a time when the sky fell and the land was covered in darkness and flood, and another from the Gunwingu of Australia, who speak of a great fire that came from the sky, followed by a world-drowning flood. These stories are dismissed as poetic invention, but look closer at the details. The timing is always the same, a distant ancestral epoch, a golden age before the world changed. The sequence of events is always the same. First, fire from the sky, then darkness, then a great flood. This is not the description of a local wildfire or a seasonal river overflowing its banks. This is a precise forensic account of a cosmic impact event and its aftermath. The fireballs from the fragmenting comet, The impact winter caused by debris in the atmosphere and the subsequent megafloods from destabilized ice sheets. The oral traditions of indigenous peoples are humanity's oldest library, a repository of knowledge and memory preserved across hundreds of generations. They are not myths, they are data. They are the human record of the Younger Dryas catastrophe, the terrified eyewitness accounts of the survivors. From Ziusudra in ancient Sumer to the tribal elders of the Amazon, the story is consistent, a global chorus of remembrance for a world torn apart by fire and water. When we listen to these stories, we are not hearing primitive folklore. We are hearing the echoes of the last great extinction, a warning that has been passed down to us across 12,000 years of darkness. You are on a research vessel in the Gulf of Cambay, off the western coast of India. The air is thick with salt and humidity. On the screen of a side-scan sonar, an impossible image resolves out of the digital noise. 30 meters below the waves, the sonar has mapped the unmistakable geometric layout of a massive city. You can see the foundations of huge buildings, the grid of ancient streets, and what appear to be great public baths and granaries. This is the lost city of Dwarka, a place long thought to be pure myth. Hindu scripture describes Dwarka as the sacred city of Lord Krishna, a golden metropolis of breathtaking beauty that was submerged by the sea in a great cataclysm. For centuries, it was a story. But in 2001, India's National Institute of Ocean Technology, while conducting a survey of pollution, stumbled upon these ruins. They dredged up artifacts, pottery, beads, pieces of sculpture, and human bones. Radiocarbon dating of a piece of wood from the site returned an age of 9,500 years. This date is revolutionary. The first cities in this part of the world, those of the Indus Valley civilization, are supposed to have appeared around 2600 BCE. But here is evidence of a major urban centre with sophisticated architecture and civil planning that is 5,000 years older. It sits on a coastline that was dry land at the end of the last ice age, a coastline that was drowned by the rising seas during a catastrophic period known as Meltwater Pulse 1b. This was not a gradual sea level rise, it was a sudden inundation, with the sea rising by as much as 25 meters in less than 500 years. Dwarka is not a myth. It is another drowned memory, a testament to the thousands of cities and millions of people who were swallowed by the second great catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age, the rising of the waters. You are in a library in London, turning the fragile pages of a 19th century translation of the Mahabharata, the great epic of ancient India. The text describes the sinking of Dwarka in vivid, heartbreaking detail. It speaks of a great storm, of the sea rising up and rushing into the city, swallowing its golden towers in a single day. Lord Krishna instructs his people to flee to the highlands, for the sea is going to break down the city. It is a perfect description of a tsunami overwhelming a coastal settlement. Now consider the legends that surround Dwarka's rediscovery. For generations, local fishermen spoke of a submerged city, and holy men prophesied its return. These were not just stories, they were living memories, passed down through an unbroken chain of oral tradition. This is a recurring pattern. The Sumerian seven sages, the Apkallu, were said to have come from the drowned land of Dilmun, a paradise now believed to be submerged in the Persian Gulf. In Egypt, the wisdom god Thoth, who the Greeks called Hermes, was said to be a survivor from a drowned land to the west, Atlantis. Across the world, the story is the same. A great flood, a handful of survivors, and the arrival of wise teachers who bring the tools of civilization. These culture bearers are the human link in the chain of memory. They are the ones who carried the knowledge of astronomy, of architecture, of agriculture, across the abyss of the Younger Dryas. The drowned city of Dwarka is not just a ruin. It is the physical proof that these stories are not myths. They are history. They are the echoes of the seven sages, the faint but persistent signal of a civilization that refused to be completely forgotten. You're in a sterile university laboratory, the low hum of machinery filling the quiet space. On a monitor before you is a ghostly magnified image from a scanning electron microscope. It is a sample taken from the Younger Dryas boundary layer, that thin black mat of sediment that separates two worlds. You see a chaotic jumble of soot and carbon, the remnants of continent-spanning wildfires. But scattered among the ash are impossibly small, perfect spheres of magnetized iron, droplets of vaporized rock that cooled and condensed in the upper atmosphere. Next to them, you see shards of melt glass, soil that was flash-heated to thousands of degrees, turning it instantly to glass before it cooled. These are not the products of any terrestrial fire. They are the unmistakable fingerprints of a hypervelocity impact. And then you see them, nanodiamonds. Not the cubic diamonds of jewellery, but a rare hexagonal form called lonsdelite, which is only ever found in nature at meteorite impact sites. It forms in a fleeting instant of unimaginable heat and pressure. Some geologists argue for alternative explanations, that the fires could be terrestrial, that the markers could have other origins. But the sheer concentration of this deadly cocktail, found in a single, unbroken layer across multiple continents, all dated to precisely 12,800 years ago, tells a different story. The Earth itself is providing the forensic evidence. This isn't a theory anymore. This is a crime scene, a scene that stretches across the entire northern hemisphere. Each microscopic sphere, each fractured crystal of quartz, is a silent witness to a moment of unimaginable violence, when the sky caught fire and the Ice Age world was plunged into a cataclysm from which it would never recover. You are standing in the basement archives of a geological institute in Russia. An elderly geologist opens a small velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on the cloth, are dozens of impossibly small spiral-shaped objects. They look like microscopic springs, some no larger than a grain of sand. These artifacts were discovered in the 1990s by gold miners in the Ural Mountains. They were found in layers of sediment between 3 and 12 meters deep, layers that date back between 20,000 and 300,000 years. When first analyzed, the conclusion was stunning. The spirals are composed of copper, tungsten, and molybdenum. Tungsten has an extremely high melting point of over 3,400 degrees Celsius, and molybdenum is nearly as robust. We use them today in hardening steel alloys and in the filaments of light bulbs. The technology to work these metals, let alone draw them into perfectly formed microscopic spirals, is a product of our modern industrial age. What are they doing in Ice Age sediment? The scientific community has largely dismissed these artifacts as modern industrial contaminants, perhaps from nearby rocket launches. But the objects were found embedded deep within undisturbed Pleistocene soil, and they continue to be found. The implications are too vast, too paradigm-shattering for most to consider. They suggest the presence of a technology on Earth, tens of thousands of years ago, that is equal or superior to our own. This isn't just a matter of lost stoneworking or astronomical knowledge. This is evidence of a lost industrial science. If a civilization capable of producing these objects existed, what else did they create, and what happened to them? The microscopic spirals of the Urals are a quiet, deeply unsettling clue that the civilization lost to the Younger Dryas may have been far more advanced than we could ever imagine. You stand in the dust and heat of southern Iraq, in the land once called Sumer. The baked earth ruins of Uruk and Eridu crumble around you. According to our textbooks, this is the cradle of civilization, the place where everything began suddenly and miraculously around 3500 BCE. Here we are told writing was invented, the first cities were built, the first laws were codified, but the Sumerians themselves told a very different story. You hold a replica of the Sumerian king list, a clay prism covered in cuneiform script. It lists generations of kings who ruled for impossibly long lifespans, but the list is broken into two distinct sections: those who ruled before the Great Flood and those who ruled after. For the Sumerians, history did not begin in Sumer. It was interrupted by the flood and then restarted there. Their own texts are explicit. Civilization was a legacy, a gift brought to them by the seven sages, the Apkallu, who survived the deluge and carried the knowledge of the former age. This is the great anomaly. Sumerian civilization appears in the archaeological record fully formed. Their mathematics, a sophisticated base 60 system we still use to measure time in circles, has no developmental period. Their astronomy, capable of tracking the planets and predicting eclipses, seems to spring from nowhere. Their writing, cuneiform, appears as a complete and complex system. This isn't the slow, gradual evolution of a primitive culture. It's the unmistakable signature of a legacy being rebooted. The survivors of the Younger Dryas, the knowledge carriers, did not create civilization from scratch. They transplanted it, finding fertile ground among the scattered tribes of post-cataclysmic Mesopotamia, kick-starting a new cycle of human history with the carefully preserved knowledge of the world that was lost. You are standing in the Cairo Museum before a glass case containing some of the oldest artifacts of dynastic Egypt. You see slate palettes carved with exquisite skill, flint knives shaped with breathtaking precision, and stone vases hollowed out with an artistry we can barely replicate today. These objects date to the very beginning of Egyptian civilization, around 3500 BCE. According to the standard model, this is the dawn of high culture on the Nile, the culmination of a slow, steady climb from primitive beginnings. But what if the climb wasn't slow and steady? What if it was a sudden leap? The anomalies of early Egypt are profound. Their hieroglyphic writing appears fully formed, with no evidence of a developmental period. Their monumental architecture seems to begin with masterpieces like the pyramids, rather than evolving from simpler structures. Their knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine is deeply sophisticated from the very start. It's as though a lost chapter of the human story is missing, a long period of development that has been completely erased. This is precisely what the evidence of a lost Ice Age civilization suggests. The survivors of the Younger Dryas, the followers of Horus from Egyptian lore, were not primitive refugees. They were the inheritors of a culture that had thousands of years of development behind it. When they arrived in the fertile, post-cataclysmic Nile Valley, they brought with them a complete template for civilization. They were not inventing writing, mathematics, and astronomy. They were remembering it. They were downloading a vast cultural inheritance into a new, stable environment. The sudden flowering of Egyptian civilization is not a mystery if we accept that its roots go far deeper into the past, back to a drowned world and a lost golden age whose memory was preserved by a handful of dedicated survivors. You are in a deep cave in the Dordogne Valley of France. Your headlamp illuminates walls covered in breathtaking art. Painted 17,000 years ago, the murals of Lascaux depict a world teeming with life. Aurochs, horses, mammoths, and bison, all rendered with astonishing skill and vitality. This was the world before the Great Freeze. But for 1,200 years after the cataclysm, this art form largely vanishes from the archaeological record. The survivors of the Younger Dryas had more pressing concerns. You are now in one of the caves they called home. The air is damp and cold, smelling of wet stone and ancient wood smoke. Your fingers trace the outline of a simple, desperate carving, a reindeer, an ibex, scratched into the rock with a piece of flint. The artistry is gone. The grandeur is gone. All that remains is the stark, brutal reality of survival. This was life during the long winter. Small, traumatized bands of humans, huddled in caves and rock shelters, their numbers decimated, their knowledge fractured. Imagine the impossible choices they faced every day. To venture out into the glacial cold to hunt, knowing you might freeze to death, or to stay in the relative warmth of the cave and starve. Imagine watching your children shiver, their faces gaunt with hunger. Imagine being the keeper of the old knowledge, the stories of the sun and stars, the memories of the time before the sky fell, and trying to pass it on to a generation that had only ever known a world of ice and desperation. This was the human condition for 40 generations. Not progress, not evolution, but a grim, stubborn battle against extinction. They were not just surviving, they were guarding a flickering flame, the last embers of a civilization, hoping that one day the sun would return and they could begin to rebuild. You are standing on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The wind is sharp, carrying the scent of salt and wild herbs. 9 meters below you, nestled in the clear blue water, are the ghostly outlines of a lost village. This is Atlit Yam, a 9,000-year-old Neolithic settlement off the coast of Israel, one of the oldest and best-preserved submerged sites ever discovered. Your dive team is preparing to explore its secrets. As you descend, a forgotten world takes shape. You drift over stone house foundations, their walls still partially intact. You see a semicircle of megaliths, a stone circle that once stood in the open air, now a silent henge for fish. A paved stone road leads towards what was once the centre of the village. The most poignant discovery is a series of graves, skeletons buried with care, still lying in their final resting places. This was not a temporary camp. It was a thriving, permanent community, home to hundreds of people who lived, loved, and died here. Then, around 7000 BCE, their world ended. Geological evidence suggests that a flank of Mount Etna collapsed into the sea, triggering a 40-meter-high tsunami that swept across the entire Mediterranean basin. The people of Atlit Yam would have had no warning. A wall of water would have appeared on the horizon, erasing their village and their world in a matter of minutes. Their fate is a microcosm of what happened to countless coastal civilizations at the end of the Ice Age. The Younger Dryas ended, the planet warmed, and the ice sheets melted with terrifying speed. The sea did not rise gradually. It came in catastrophic pulses, drowning coastlines and forcing mass migrations, a second great catastrophe that reshaped the human story. You are sitting in a quiet university library, an ancient Greek text open before you. It is Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus and Critias. In it, he recounts a story told to the Athenian lawmaker Solon by Egyptian priests at the Temple of Sais. The priests speak of a great advanced civilization, a mighty maritime empire called Atlantis, located on an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. They describe a technologically and spiritually sophisticated culture that existed 9,000 years before their time. And then, they say, in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. For centuries this story has been dismissed as a philosophical fable. But what if we read it not as myth, but as history, transmitted from the survivors of a cataclysm to the priests of Egypt, and finally to Plato? The timeline is what's truly staggering. 9,000 years before Solon's time would place the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9600 BCE, 11,600 years ago. This is the exact date for the end of the Younger Dryas, and the beginning of the catastrophic sea level rise known as meltwater pulse 1b. Plato gives us a precise date, a precise location, and a precise mechanism of destruction, a world-drowning flood. He's describing the end of the Ice Age and the inundation of the continental shelves where Ice Age humanity lived. Perhaps Atlantis was not a single island, but a collective memory of a global coastal civilization, the peoples of Doggerland, Sundaland, and Beringia. Plato may have been preserving the single most important piece of historical information ever recorded, an account of the mother culture, the great maritime civilization that was lost beneath the waves, leaving behind only scattered survivors to tell its tragic tale. You are now hovering in a satellite high above the earth, looking down at the desolate expanse of the Sahara Desert. In the heart of Mauritania, a spectacular geological formation dominates the landscape, the Risha structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It is a near-perfect circle, 40 kilometers in diameter, composed of concentric rings of eroded rock. Geologists identify it as a deeply eroded geological dome, but its uncanny resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis has not gone unnoticed. Plato described the capital city of Atlantis as being made of concentric rings of land and water, with a central island at its heart. The Risha structure fits this description with breathtaking precision. What's more, Plato describes mountains to the north of the city, and a plain opening to the south, leading down to the sea. The geography of northwest Africa matches this perfectly, and during the African humid period, 12,000 years ago, this entire region was green and fertile, crisscrossed by massive river systems that flowed south to the Atlantic. This was a paradise, and the archaeological evidence confirms it. The ground around the Ishat structure is littered with thousands of Paleolithic artifacts, axes, arrowheads, and spear points. This was a heavily populated area during the Ice Age. Could this be the site of Plato's lost city? The theory is controversial, but it highlights a crucial point. We assume the survivors of the Younger Dryas were exclusively maritime people, fleeing inundated coastlines. But the cataclysm was global. Inland civilizations like those of the Green Sahara would have been devastated by the sudden climate shift that turned their lush savanna into an uninhabitable desert. They too would have become refugees, forced to migrate, carrying their knowledge with them, perhaps east down a once mighty river system that would one day become the Nile. You are sitting around a crackling fire in the Australian outback. The night sky is a brilliant, terrifying ocean of stars, undimmed by city lights. An Aboriginal elder is speaking, his voice weathered and ancient. He is telling you the stories his grandfather told him, stories that have been passed down in an unbroken chain for 60,000 years. He points to the dark shapes between the stars, the dust lanes of the Milky Way, and tells you the story of the celestial emu. He speaks of a time when the coastline was different, when his people could walk to lands that are now islands. Modern science has dismissed these stories as primitive cosmology, but in the last decade researchers have begun to map Aboriginal oral traditions against geological and astronomical data. What they have found is astonishing. The stories of drowned coastlines perfectly match the sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. Star maps embedded in the myths accurately depict the sky as it was 10, 15, even 20,000 years ago, accounting for the slow drift of precession. This is not mythology. This is science, preserved in the most durable medium known to man, the human memory passed down through ritual and story. For millennia, we have patronized these cultures as primitive, when in fact they were the most successful civilization of all. They survived the Younger Dryas. They witnessed the drowning of a continent, and they held on to the knowledge of that lost world, protecting it, encoding it in story and song. When we listen to these traditions with respect, we are not just hearing folklore, we are hearing the voices of the true survivors of the last ice age, the last living link to a world we have almost completely forgotten. You are standing on a remote mesa in Arizona, inside a kiva, the sacred underground chamber of the Hopi people. The air is cool and smells of earth and juniper smoke. A Hopi elder is your guide, sharing the stories of his ancestors. He speaks of a succession of worlds. The first world was destroyed by fire. The second world was destroyed by ice. The third world, he says, was destroyed by a great flood. The people who were righteous were saved by Spider-Woman, who led them into hollow reeds and sealed them with pitch. They floated on the floodwaters until they found new land, this land, the fourth world. He is not telling you a myth, he is telling you his history. The details are too specific, too consistent with the geological record to be dismissed. The Hopi remember the Ice Age. They remember the fires of the Younger Dryas impact. They remember the meltwater floods. Their oral tradition is a multi-generational eyewitness account of the end of the world. This is the power of indigenous knowledge. While our written history has amnesia about anything before 5,000 years ago, these oral traditions are a living library of deep time. They are a tapestry woven from memory, ritual, and landscape, preserving the knowledge of events that our science is only now rediscovering. When the Hopi elder tells you of the ant people who sheltered them underground during the cataclysms, is he speaking of literal ants, or is he using a powerful metaphor to describe seeking refuge in caves and underground shelters during the 1,200 years of the Younger Dryas winter? We have been too quick to dismiss these traditions as primitive superstition. It is time we started listening. They are the voices of the survivors, and they have been trying to tell us their story for 12,000 years. You have returned to where our journey began, on the windswept hilltop of Göbekli Tepe. The sun is setting, casting long shadows from the great T-shaped pillars. You place your hand on one of the stones, feeling the cool, rough surface that has kept its secrets for 12,000 years. This place is the Rosetta Stone for understanding our lost past. It was built by hunter-gatherers, we are told. But what kind of hunter-gatherers quarry 20-ton monoliths, arrange them in perfect circles aligned to the stars, and cover them in sophisticated astronomical symbolism? The contradiction is the key. Göbekli Tepe was not built by primitive hunters. It was built by the survivors of a sophisticated civilization who gathered here in this high refuge zone after their world was destroyed. This was not a temple to greet the dawn of agriculture. It was a memorial to a drowned world. It was an astronomical device, a tool to track the precession of the equinoxes, to ensure that the vital, sacred knowledge of the cosmos would not be lost. And it was a warning. Pillar 43, the vulture stone, is a date stamp for the day the world ended. A message carved by the survivors to ensure that future generations would remember the cataclysm. The story is all here, written in the language of stone and stars, a great civilization brought to its knees by a cosmic disaster, a long, dark age of survival, and a concerted, desperate effort by the few who remembered to preserve the knowledge of their ancestors. This place is a testament not to the dawn of civilization, but to its resilience. It is a monument to the indomitable human spirit, and a solemn reminder that the stable, comfortable world we inhabit is a fragile, fleeting gift. The builders of Göbekli Tepe knew this. They had learned it the hard way. You are standing on a high alpine ridge in the Norwegian mountains. The wind is a razor, cutting through your layers of clothing. An archaeologist kneels, carefully brushing away centuries of accumulated ice from a thawing ice patch. As the ice recedes, it reveals a perfectly preserved arrow, its sinew bindings and feather fletching still intact after 6,000 years in deep freeze. All across the world, from the Alps to the Yukon, the warming climate is melting ancient ice and revealing a lost world of astonishing preservation. In Canada, caribou hunters are finding 9,000-year-old weapons, tools so exquisitely crafted they look like they were made yesterday. In Switzerland, the melting Aletsch Glacier is giving up trees that have been buried in ice for 10,000 years. And most famously, in the Italian Alps, the discovery of Ötzi the Iceman, a 5,300-year-old hunter emerging from his glacial tomb, gave us an unprecedented glimpse into the prehistoric world. These finds are just the beginning. They are the artifacts emerging from the melting edges of our planet's great repositories of ice. What else lies frozen, waiting to be discovered? What secrets are held in the 3-kilometre thick ice sheet of Greenland, or the vast continent-spanning ice of Antarctica? What forgotten forests, what lost cities, what remains of unknown civilizations lie buried beneath the ice? The melting ice is a paradox. It is a symptom of our current climate crisis, but it is also a key, a portal into the last great climate crisis that reset the human story. The Earth is beginning to give up the ghosts of the Ice Age, and we have only just begun to listen to what they have to say. You're in a small boat on a vast grey sea surrounded by a panorama of ice. Glaciers carve into the water with a sound like thunder. This is the coast of Greenland. You're at the edge of the world, a place where the forces of climate are raw and visible. This journey through our frozen past ends here, with a series of profound and unsettling questions. Are we the first? Is it possible that another advanced civilization, perhaps one very much like our own, existed on this planet and was wiped from the record by a global cataclysm? The evidence we have examined, the impossible ruins, the submerged cities, the genetic scars, the geological fingerprints of catastrophe, and the universal myths of a great flood, all point to a single coherent story, a story of a great human civilization born in the Ice Age that was nearly erased. We are a species with amnesia. We have forgotten a profound chapter of our own story. The stable, warm climate of the last 11,000 years is an anomaly. The Earth's climate is naturally volatile, prone to sudden and violent shifts. What happened during the Younger Dryas was not a freak event. It is part of a cycle. Another ice age will come. Another cosmic impact is not a matter of if, but when. Are we prepared? Would our vaunted technological civilization, with its fragile global supply chains and its reliance on a stable climate, fare any better than our ancestors did? The megalithic monuments, the oral traditions, the very stories that we have dismissed as myth, perhaps these are not just memories. Perhaps they are a warning, a message from the survivors of the last end of the world intended for us, a message that says, what has happened before can and will happen again. You stand once more before the great Sphinx at Giza. The sun is setting, and the monument is bathed in a final golden light. It has kept its vigil for more than 12,000 years, its gaze fixed on the eastern horizon, watching the slow, inexorable turning of the celestial wheel. It is a survivor, a silent witness to the destruction of one world and the birth of another. The story of the Younger Dryas is not just a geological curiosity. It is a profound and perhaps necessary lesson in humility. It teaches us that civilization is not a permanent achievement, but a fragile gift, dependent on a stable climate and a predictable cosmos. We have built our world in a brief, idyllic window of warmth and calm, an interglacial period that will inevitably end. The cycles of the Earth are vast and unforgiving. Are we the first technologically advanced civilization to rise on this planet? The evidence suggests we are not, and if we are not the first, what makes us think we will be the last? The story of our amnesia is perhaps the greatest tragedy. We have forgotten the warnings left for us, written in stone, in myth, and in the stars. We have mistaken the memories of our ancestors for fantasies. The final question is not what happened to the lost civilization of the Ice Age, but whether we will have the wisdom to learn from their fate. The Sphinx remains silent, its stone eyes watching the sky, waiting for the cycle to turn once more.